here. This is from yesterday. These are my nice little.
Teach me a new way to study about it.
That's right. These are my nice little illustrations, right? Where we talked about covenant, right? What was the definition of covenant that we gave? Good. Yeah. So we have an agreement, not necessarily with the God though, right? Now in the Hebrew text, they are definitely made between
two parties,
God and the people of Israel, but generally, yes, it's an agreement, it's a treaty.
primary document.
Right. Good. Between two parties. And here we have our, what's that? Sorry? That's part of it. Like part of it is being witnessed. That's part of the form of it. Right? Kind of like, this is in a sense like covenant's a kind of genre. Right? Because there's these definite things you can look to. Is it being witnessed? Is there a sign of it? Right? All this kind of stuff. Good. What's this first form? It's my nice little symbol here. Do you remember that one?
This is a Christmas soup. Yeah, him.
Suzerainty.
Yeah, that's the one.
Suzerainty. I'm not going to spell this correctly, so look at your notes. Suzerainty, right? Here's our suzerain. Here's our little person who he's making the covenant with. And this person is standing in for all these other people, right? Right? King of the Bobites is making a covenant with Bob, but Bob is standing in for all the Bobites. Right? What's this next one?
Parity.
Is that a parody?
No.
Royal
For the royal
Good.
land.
This is our royal land grant. Right? Because King of the Bobites is making a covenant with Bob and kind of Bob's family as long as what? Good. As long as they remain kind of loyal subjects. Right? If Sam over here, tries to have some kind of insurrection and overthrow the king of the Bobites, he's not going to be able to be a part of this, right? Yeah.
Okay, so if Sam down here does something to mess it up, does it mess it up for the whole family?
Not necessarily, no. He's just cut out of it. He'll probably get killed. Depending on how bad it is. Yeah. No, it wouldn't like mess it up for everybody. But in a sense, in the ancient Near East, and we'll kind of talk just a little bit about this today, the general structures of society are very much based on the family. And so there is a potential that like one member of the family could, like in trying to do something or in being unfaithful to the king, could kind of put that whole unit in jeopardy. Because that family unit is so central to their social structure. What's this last one?
Parity.
Good, right? Just think of two people, it's a pair, right? Parity. This is between like two rulers, for instance, will respect each other's boundaries, we'll have trade agreements, that kind of thing. Good. And what did we say Noah's, the covenant with Noah is? Is it with suzerainty?
Oh, no, it's not royal land.
Yeah,
Royal land.
right. With Noah and his descendants, and God also makes it with, in a sense, with all creation, right? But with Noah, since it is just his family in existence, right, there is this kind of royal land grant aspect to the covenant of Noah. Good.
And the parity was what was that?
A parity is between like two rulers, right? So two rulers kind of respecting each other's kingdoms. Good. Now, this is we started talking about covenants with Noah, right? Because we see that covenant form with Noah. But it's really, like we said yesterday, with Abraham, that the covenant relationship with God and a particular people really comes into focus. And this is the covenant that really defines Israel's relationship with Yahweh. Right? Israel's relationship with their God is established first and foremost through this covenant with Abraham. So let's get a little background on just who this character is. Okay. Abraham starts us into what gets referred to as the age of the patriarchs. right? And patriarch just means father ruler. Right? As opposed to matriarch, right? Which would be mother ruler. Right, so Abraham is the first of the patriarchs. And kind of what we'll be talking about today and tomorrow are the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The age of the patriarchs extends roughly between 1950 and 1500 BCE. Relationship with Yahweh. So we can have some space here. Okay. So this is kind of around about this time period, the patriarchal time period. And what we see with the patriarchal time period, remember how I was saying that so much hinged on the family unit in the ancient Near East? What we see in the patriarchal time period is this strong emphasis on kinship. It's not kingship, kinship, right? Like your kin, right? The people that you are related to. Think for a little bit when we drew out our timeline, right? We saw how civilization developed. Why would kinship be important this early on rather than kingship? Why weren't there any kings? What do you need to have a king? Right? What's included in a kingdom? Subject. What else?
Government.
If you have a kingdom, is that typically going to be over a somewhat stable area?
Yeah, land.
So land, right? If I now have this land, but also what you guys said needs to be in that land are subjects, right? So if I'm a king here, right? Here's my little king. Way too big of a crown. Here's my little king. If all of my subjects are just moving around,
There's no order.
there's not going to be a lot of order. There's not going to be any cities, any civilizations, any kind of consistent places, no established cities. So we have this emphasis on kinship because this is around that time period when people are still fairly nomadic. Right? If people are moving around a lot, you're not going to really have a lot of kings. And that's why we have this strong emphasis on kinship during this patriarchal period, is because people are still moving around a lot. There are no real established cities as much. Right? That's still a little bit in flux. Things are kind of transitioning over into having these cities. So that's why we're going to have this idea of kinship, and this idea is going to pervade a lot of society and even religion. For example, what we'll see is this idea of Abraham's covenant with God taking this form. Right? You have Abraham representing all of his descendants in his family. The relationship with Israel's God is such that it is bound to Abraham and Abraham's family. Right? We'll see with the covenant he makes today, that when God says, I'm making a covenant with you and with all of your descendants, right? I'm promising you descendants. Anybody who kind of falls outside of that family line is, in a sense, outside of that religious group. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Anybody who falls outside of that family line falls outside of that religious group. So even the identity of Israel during this time, and who is Israelite slash, you could say a follower of Yahweh, is defined by these family ties. If you are not kin to Abraham, then you are not going to be part of this religious or this family unit. Okay. Now the patriarchs are going to introduce us to some major themes in the Torah in general. Remember those first 5 books, the Torah, the Pentateuch. And 2 major themes that we need to keep an eye out for is that God has, let's say themes here. Themes. God has a purpose or a plan for history. It's our first one. And the second one is that God has chosen the Hebrew people to accomplish that. Okay, so these are the 2 themes that we're going to see with the patriarchs, and in a sense extending through, in a sense, the rest of the Torah, but also the rest of the Hebrew Bible to one extent or another. Is that God has this purpose or plan for history, and that the Hebrew people are chosen to, or God's chosen means of accomplishing that.
I have a question.
Mhm.
God has a purpose plan for history or future?
Same thing. Same thing. Right. History not being what was before, but history as in where everything is going. Does that make sense?
No.
No, that's okay. So it's not that God has a purpose plan to I'm going to rewrite what went before. Just history in the sense of the history of the world, what will happen.
Oh, okay.
Right. I mean, you can even
History
say,
going backwards.
you could even say,
Forward.
no, you could say for the world. Right. Creation. Right.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
More?
Or
Yeah.
like current history.
Yeah, so not like God has a plan for that stuff that was back there, in a sense, but that stuff and everything that will continue, that is being directed in a certain way.
So what happened in the past and in the present?
Say that one more time.
Like the past will bring the present.
In a sense, that's all part of one storyline.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. That all of history, past and future, is part of God's directing.
Okay.
Yeah. And then He's using the Hebrews to do that directing.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense, everybody?
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, what we need to make sure we do as well, and what gets really interesting is when we start looking at these patriarchs, right, when we start looking at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is that Israel is kind of narrating their history through these 3 people. But in a sense, each of these people is representing one aspect, or a couple aspects, of how Israel understands itself. Right? Think of the patriarchs this way. Think of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob this way. Through their story, Israel is kind of painting its own little self-portrait. Each of the patriarchs is a particular brush. Okay? Each of the patriarchs is a particular way that Israel is understanding its own identity. Right? You can also think of the patriarchs as seeds. Right? Kind of encapsulating who Israel understands itself to be. Right? And it's from the story of the patriarchs that we get the people of Israel. Right? So each of these 3 individuals is going to help us understand who Israel understands itself to be. Right? Remember, they're not just narrating history with these stories. They're not just saying Abraham then was around and then some stuff happened, and then you had Isaac and then some more stuff happened, and then there was Jacob and some more stuff happened. They're not just giving you this unbiased perspective of history. They're trying to tell you meaning. They're trying to understand themselves by telling these stories. Yeah.
So is this more, when you say that, is it more like an ascribed identity or more of an avowed? As far as what I see myself as or what somebody's telling me I should see myself as?
I think what we'll see with the patriarchs is a complex picture. In the sense, Everything's complicated. No. Well, mostly how they see themselves, but also how they want to see themselves,
Okay.
how they want to be, right? I think all of us kind of have an idea, like, this is who I am, but I also have a person who I want to be, right? And that's what we'll see with the patriarchs, is both of those, right? Who they think they are and who they want to be.
I just want to ask you, do you think that this is a myth or history, or do you think that this what's in the Bible is really true?
True in what sense? Historically accurate?
Yes.
No. I do not think it's historically accurate. That does not mean that these stories can't have truth to them. Right? The meaning of this story is true to the people who wrote them. Right? This is again like that modern division we have between if it's not historically accurate, then it's not true. But that's a modern distinction. The truth depends on historical accuracy and something you can prove scientifically.
Because some people look at it as a myth, and some people look at it as being truthfully things that really happened back then.
Sure. A good way, and this was going to come up in a later, but since you asked, it's a good place to say this. The episodes from kind of Abraham through Joshua and Judges. One scholar refers to them as this. Ooh, if I can spell it. This might be wrong, but I think this is how you spell it. Who here has used mnemonics before? What's a mnemonic, Jackson? Anybody remember what mnemonics? Anybody elementary school teacher?
It's just something from the brain, though. It's the,
A little bit?
It's, oh Lord, it's using something else in place of. Is that a mnemonic?
Uh-huh.
It's like a brain trick almost.
Yeah, that's what.
Right? It's a memory device.
Yeah.
Right? One way of thinking about Abraham through Judges is as being a way to remember history in a certain way. Right? Is a pneumohistory. Right? Pneumatics help us remember, so it is a remembered history. It is a way that history is remembered such as to inform a present identity. Right? When you tell your own autobiography, right, you say, you narrate it historically in a sense, but you also are picking out the important parts. You know, because there's some parts like what you ate for breakfast 2 months ago isn't going to really matter who you are, right? Unless you say choked on your Cheerios and had a near-death experience, in which case you saw the flying spaghetti monster in the sky and realized, oh, that's who I should be worshiping, right? Unless there's some like massive revelation coming from eating those Cheerios, you're not going to think that's important, right? So when Israel is narrating its history, they're narrating it in such a way to say, this is important to understand who we are, right? This is an important way to understand not only who we are, but what we mean in this grand scale of things, or grand scheme, right? What is this purpose that is there, and how are we playing a part in it? Okay.
So is that why you have like you said, who they want to be, and then you have like their up periods and then their downfalls?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, when we look at these texts, Israel's not painted with a pretty picture, hardly at all. They present themselves very bluntly a lot of times. So, but in a sense, to kind of say, because usually when Israel acts in a way that it shouldn't, there are consequences, right? And that's how they're showing the character of God and what God's plan is, right? If you falter, or if you fail, or if you do what you shouldn't do, then there will be consequences, right? If you step outside of this purpose or plan and do whatever you want to do, right? So the text is communicating, then you are not acting as this chosen people, and there are going to be consequences, right? So it's communicating that meaning with those stories of downfall.
And with that would make the text constantly altered then. Like it would never just have like one definite depiction of what it's supposed to be, because nobody knows what it's supposed to be.
In a sense, I mean, I think a lot of these stories, you know, had very, in a sense, had staying power, or were memorable and were kind of regarded as important stories. But I think what we do see is, in what you're saying, some of this, we see even in the text itself how single stories have developed differently, right? So with the story of the flood that we looked at, right, we have two different accounts of the flood, right? But this is still one story that has been very important to the Hebrew people, but but it got told two different ways because they're coming from two different places, right? They've kind of developed differently. We see that possibly with Abraham telling two different kings that Sarah is his sister, right? You get the story that's kind of repeated, but just happens with two different kings. So there is this fluctuation. But remember, they're not focused on historical accuracy. They're focused on that meaning. So there is, and so as Israel goes along in its history, those stories are going to fluctuate so that they can understand who they are in that present circumstance, right? Possibly even how the story of Adam and Eve acquired this exile ending to it, where they were banished from the garden, right? That might have been an addition that came along when Israel got exiled from their land, right? It's like, oh, how do we understand this? Well, if we relate this back to the story that we've been telling for millennia, right, this can help us make sense of it. Good. So, let's start with Abraham for the last bit of class here. I'll just throw that around. Let's pull up, if you want to take out your Hebrew Bibles, or your English ones, whichever the case may be. And start looking at Abraham's story here. What's the first thing that really happens here in Abram's story? And notice we are talking about Abram at this point. He is not yet Abraham. What happens first here?
God tells him to go.
Good. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Right? Not even telling him where it is, just saying go. Right? And then after we have this little bit, so Abram went. Right? Abram, in speaking about this self-portrait here, Abram is the example or exemplar, the epitome of faithfulness. And we'll see that played out in multiple ways. God tells Abraham to do something, and the dude does it. Okay, it happens time and time again in some ways. There's some places where Abraham kind of falters. But from the outside of Abraham's story, his character is kind of defined. God says go, doesn't even tell him where, kind of offers him some good things if he does this, and then we just have Abraham going, or Abram going. Good. What is promised to Abraham in this first little bit? Kind of through this section. Where's land?
It says, to the land that I will show you.
So he's just saying go, but is that promised him in that section?
Okay, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will.
Good.
Make
Okay, so we have a great nation. I will
Bless
bless you.
Great name. You will be a blessing. He's promised.
Yeah, bless him. Blah, blah, blah.
Bless his
Right,
Great
make a
name.
great
That's
name,
what
right?
he's
This is
saying.
kind of going along with that great nation. All right, what else? There's some other stuff down here.
The land.
Your offspring.
Oh,
Him, him, man.
Good. So we have three promises here, right? We have the promise of, right, you can say a great nation and a great name and offspring. This is all kind of tying into the promise of, you can say progeny, you can say descendants, you can say children. We'll say progeny because it's a nice fun word and it's a word you will now learn and remember. Right? Progeny, descendants, children. This is what he's promising. To have your name great, to be a great nation, is to have many offspring. Right? So this is the first promise. The second promise is that he will bless him. Right? I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I shall curse, and in you or through you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Okay, there's going to be some prophets that really come back to this and kind of accuse Israel of forgetting that part. Right? so that you will be a blessing, right? Almost in a sense that with this blessing, there's also purpose in this blessing. Okay, Israel's kind of call in that part. And then finally, land. Progeny, blessing, and land are our three promises. God does not promise Abram long life. Okay. Now, kind of looking at this, is this a covenant? Oh, sorry, go.
How many years did he live though?
I mean, he lived a while.
Yeah, the baby when he was 90 something.
Huh? Yeah, we'll get there. He definitely lived a while, but that's not part of the promise. Right? He did live a long time.
That's what I thought about when I was trying to
Yeah.
answer.
It's like, did he promise that or did he just live a long time? Right.
He was old when he
It was
had
worse
a
than
baby.
he did promise him that he would live a long time.
What's that?
It was one of those verses God promised him he would live a long
No,
time.
that's not in there. I mean, if you find it, let me know.
Backtrack.
If you want it down, you let me know. Is this a covenant?
Yes,
No.
yes,
That's a command.
yeah,
It's not a covenant.
Because it doesn't require.
It doesn't say what happens if he breaks it though.
Yes, the
Usually
Lord
there's like
made
a
it
double
with him.
agreement, like
But he
this
said the
is
agreement
what you
had to be
get
between
if you
two,
break
though.
it.
Him and the Lord.
Did he make that agreement? Hey,
He went.
It was more like,
obviously-
this is
Right.
what's, this,
So he obeyed the call to go.
Right.
yeah, but he wasn't given the option of whether he agreed or not.
It's
He was
kind of
just
a
told this is
command,
what's going
yeah.
on.
Told him what to do and he did.
Good. We have a command,
Yeah.
and let me see, where is it?
but when he,
And we have a promise,
Yeah, I would.
right? This is just promise. There's no agreement here,
but
right?
when he takes up the commands is, all his, Abram took his wife,
Right.
Sarai.
Took everybody
And
with
then
him.
when he set that in motion, he did the going, and so now it's up to God to do the I will make you.
Is
So
that
we can see maybe like some kind of like tacit, agreement there. But what are some things that we're missing that we usually see in covenants that we're not seeing here?
What happens if you don't do that?
There's no ritual.
Name change.
There's no sign of the covenant.
How about when he
He's
builds the
taking
altar?
him at his
Yeah,
word.
that's what I was thinking.
What's that?
When he
Just
builds the
take-
altar,
That would be
when he
some
builds the
altar.
He built an altar, right? But that's the same thing that Joseph did. No, sorry, not Joseph. Who am I thinking of? Yeah,
No,
when Joseph saw the angels ascending and descending, Jacob, sorry. When Jacob saw that, right, he built an altar because it was a holy place. Here you have God speaking to Moses, or speaking to Abram and making this great promise. And so that's going to be a holy place, right? You build an altar, right? You worship there, right? But this isn't really a covenant yet, right? And emphasis on the yet. This is not covenant yet. This is kind of just put in the form of a promise. What's something that's also interesting about the blessing, or about the promise for children? What's kind of missing from that promise? Something that we take for granted, or people who know the story take for granted, but it doesn't say explicitly.
the age.
Doesn't say how old he'll be. Good. He's 75 now.
Yeah.
It's pretty old.
He what?
So when,
Doesn't say when. Good.
doesn't say
where?
sovereign.
Who?
Good. What's that?
Who?
What do you mean who?
By who?
Aha. Does not say by whom. By whom is he going to have these children? Because if we read back to chapter 11, verse 30, which is just a couple verses before all this, we read the nice little verse that says, "And Sarah had no children because Sarah was barren." And Sarah is Abram's wife. Right? We don't know by whom this promise is going to be fulfilled. And if we're reading this for the first time, we probably don't think it's going to be Sarah, because she's barren. Right? And this is kind of the first time we have a barren woman in the text. And barrenness is often seen as being a curse. Right? Why would barrenness be seen as a curse?
'cause it was given.
So he always told him to look.
Woo. Oh, sorry. All right, one person at a time. Anybody?
Because it was given the commandment to be fruitful and multiply.
Right? Remember that was part of the blessing at the beginning of creation. The blessing was to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. If you cannot do that, then there is something cosmically wrong, right? You are cursed. You are outside of that blessing, right? So we don't know at the beginning of this by whom this promise is going to be fulfilled. Good. Let's see here. We get another kind of hint of this promise in 13. We scroll down here. Right here at the end. The Lord said to Abram and Lot, or after Lot had separated him, raise your eyes, look all over the place. The land that you see, I will give to your offspring. Right? I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. So it's actually from this point on that we kind of see the language of blessing kind of disappear, and we see an emphasis on these two. Right? But here again in 13, here's this promise. Right? Look around, this whole land that you're at now, I'll give to your offspring, who will be as numerous as the stars or as the sand. Now, it's not really until chapter 15 that this promise gets kind of laid down permanently in the form of a covenant. Abram's pretty old at this point. We don't know how old he is. He is less than 99, but he's round about that age. Still a young man. No, he's getting up there. And the text is wanting to make clear that he is an old man and that Sarah is old, and that it is just absurd to think that they will have children. Right? Sarah laughs. Abraham even says, right here, I will continue childless, and the heir of my house, this guy Eliezer, will be, he'll inherit. It's like God shows up, says, don't be afraid, I'm here. And Abram's like, look, I've been waiting a long time, and I don't have any descendants. I'm well past the age. I've been well past the age. Sarah is also way past the age. This guy is going to be the inheritor. Right? God says, nope. This man shall not be your heir. No one but your very own issue, probably seed in Hebrew, would be my guess, shall be your heir. Right? Any mention of Sarah yet?
No.
Nope. Right? So shall your descendants be, right? It will be your own seed.
15.
Yeah, this is 15. Right? And now we start seeing the form of the covenant. And we see it here. Right? Also, and Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. Right? Talking about Abram. Right here. It's epitome of faithfulness. Abram believed. Right? And it's reckoned to him as righteousness. And here is where we have our nice little form of a suzerainty treaty. Right? Notice this first little bit. I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. Right? We have the identification of the suzerain. Check. We have the history. Brought you out of the land of the Chaldeans. Check. Let's see. Bring me a heifer 3 years old. And now we have this nice little event where he brings them, God commands him to bring him certain animals, and he cut them in two, laying each half over against the other. Right? He doesn't cut the birds because they're kind of tiny, and he kind of just messing the whole thing up to do that. But he cuts these two things in two. Remember we talked about covenant was cutting a covenant? Right? That's what we have here. Right? He's starting this covenant ritual. What's interesting, however, is after all this is set up and God kind of starts this whole covenant process, identifying himself, identifying his history, setting up this whole thing, is that we get Abram falling into a deep sleep. And it's not really clear whether the rest of this is a dream or a vision or something that really happens as Abram is asleep. Right? Because then we have the Lord saying to Abram, right? Is he saying it to him in his sleep? Is he saying it to him as a vision? Is he waking up to this? And notice for certain that your offspring shall be aliens. And he goes through this whole little bit here, right? These kind of promise and conditions. They shall come back in here in the fourth generation, so on and so forth. And when the sun had gone down, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces, right? He's right here. And on that day, the Lord God made a covenant. Who does not go through or between the pieces? Sarah. What's that? Sarah doesn't, but Abram doesn't either, right? We have here this smoking fire pot, flaming torch kind of deal passing between the two pieces, right? And Abram is either just watching this, or envisioning it, or dreaming this. But either way, the text seems to be saying that the weight of the covenant, the one who is really taking this covenant on himself, is Yahweh. Right? In a sense, it's kind of saying, the text is kind of saying, I know you will break this covenant. So instead of making it such that for us to make this agreement, for you to walk between these two pieces, and for you to be destroyed every time you break this covenant, it is only I, Yahweh, who will bind myself this strictly to the covenant.
And is that what makes, that's what makes the results of it unconditional?
In a sense, yeah. Yeah, because Abram isn't breaking through, isn't walking through, and so isn't binding himself to, when he fails, that he will be destroyed or killed. Right? Yeah.
If Abram, because like I guess stipulations or whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
the first promise were descendants and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
If Abram walked through the covenant, would that mean that his descendants were bound to that covenant as well?
Yes. Yeah. So it'd be he and his covenants, right? Or in his descendants, right? Because he's kind of representing this non-existent entity of all of his descendants right now.
And that's what brings it back to a royal land grant?
No, to the suzerainty. Right. Saying on the side. He's kind of standing in for the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. Right? He's representing all the people. Okay. We will pick back up with Abram and talk about Isaac.